ביאור משנה זין. Explanation for משנה זין. 3 דברים צריך אדם לומר בתוך ביתו. 3 things a person needs to say inside his house. בנחת. And he needs to say it calmly. That's the important things. Calmly. Not to scream and shout. כדי שישמעו לו. So that people are going to be hurrying up. When does he need to say it? ערב שבת עם חשיכה. Friday night when it's getting dark. סמוך לחשיכה. When it's getting dark. What does he have to say? איסרתם. He needs to tell them, did you tithe? Did you give tithe? We're going to eat now. And on Shabbat, what's the problem on Shabbat? You cannot tithe.
You cannot tithe.
We cannot tithe. So make sure we're going to eat.
Before Shabbos you can eat.
That's right. הפרשתם את המעשר מכל הדברים המוכנים לסעודת שבת? Did you tithe from all the things we're going to eat in Shabbat? שכן השבת קובעת למעשר, אף לגבי אכילת ארעי. Because Shabbat, when we learned it in, we're learning Meiser. It says when Shabbat comes in, it grabs the Meiser. You need to give the Meiser in a weekly manner. It's like the taxes. Okay. It catches the Meiser. אף לגבי אכילת ארעי, even if you're just going to eat a little bit. עירבתם? Did you make עירוב? What's עירוב? עירובי תחומין ועירובי חצרות. Both עירובי תחומים and עירובי חצרות. What does that mean? כבר ביארנו במקומות אחדים. We already mentioned in many places. שעירוב תחומים, what's עירוב תחומים? היינו שמניחים בערב שבת, that you put before שבת, מזון 2 סעודות בסוף תחום שבת. You put food that is enough for 2 meals in the end of the, when you go out of the city, there's a thing called תחום שבת, the שבת. בתחום שבת, שהיא 2,000 אמה ממקום מושבו. It is about 2,000 amma from the place that he is sitting. 2,000 amma is about a mile, or about a kilometer, somewhere around there. כדי שיהיה לו מותר ללכת משם בשבת עוד 2,000 אמה, because he needs to go 1 more kilometer outside the תחום. On Shabbat, he's allowed to walk this way now. But if he doesn't have the breads over there, he won't be able to go. So if there's a town over here, and there's a town over here, and there's 3,000, there's 3, or let's say there's 2 kilometers in between the 2 towns, and you know there's a bris over there, and you want to go for Shabbat for a bris, you're not allowed to go, because it's outside of Tchum Shabbat. But if you put a meal somewhere in between, now you'll be able to go from one town to the next town. That's Eruvei Tchumim. If you want to go from one town to visit your grandma, she has a birthday in the old town, on Shabbat. V'Eruvei Chatzerot, and also you need to do Eruvei Chatzerot, to put together the courtyards, היינו שכל הדיירים של חצר אחת, that if you have all the occupants that share 1 yard, נותנים בערב שבת מזון בביתו של אחד מהם. They give on ערב שבת food in the house of one of them. ומערבים על ידי כך את כל הרשויות שלהם לרשות אחת. And that's what they make it. So it's, in other words, they put all the properties together. Now, what's the use of putting the properties together? כדי שיהיה מותר לכל אחד להוציא מביתו לחצר, או להכניס מהחצר לבית. This one now, they're permitted to get all the objects from their house into the yard, or from the yard back into the house. Otherwise, it's not only yours, it's somebody else's, it's going to be a problem.
But this you have to do every Shabbos? I thought if you have a home, then you don't have to do every Shabbos, no?
No, you have to do it once a year, But before Shabbat, you have to make sure that it's done. הדליקו את הנר. Another thing he needs to say, hey, remind the wife to light the candle. שני הדברים הראשונים אומר האדם בלשון שאלה. It says the first 2 things he asks. Did you guys do it? Did you guys do it? Over here it is not asking. He's saying. He's commanding. ששמה כבר עשו אותם, because maybe you already did them. So the first 2 things, maybe you already did it. But this one, for sure they didn't do. אבל בעניין הדלקת הנר לא שייך לשאול, but when it comes to lighting the candles, there's no, you can see. There's no necessary to ask. שהרי הוא רואה אם הודלקו נרות שבת אם לא, because he sees if the candles are lit or not. הילקח בבוא הזמן הדלקת הנרות, so when the time comes to light the candles, מזרז האדם את אשתו שתדליק את הנרות. A person needs to remind his wife that she's going to light the candles. Again, בנחת. calmly. בגמרא למדים, 3 דברים האלה מן הכתוב, in the Gemara you learn these 3 things from Moed in Sweden, וידעת, it says in Iyov, and you should know, כי שלום אוהליך, ופקודת נובך ולא תחטא. What does it mean? הוא מפרש הריף, the Rif explains, וידעת כי שלום אוהליך, you should know that your tent is in peace. What does that refer to? זה נר של שבת. This is the candle of Shabbat. שמביא לידי שלום בית. Because when there's a candle, it brings to peace in the house. Because imagine you come back from shul, it's all dark, and you stumble over something. Immediately, instead of being happy about Shabbat, you're studying, saying things you're not supposed to say out of your mouth. ופקדת נבך, and you should establish your view, let's call it your view, like נווה. זה עירוב. This is called an עירוב. שהוא דבר הצריך לנווה לטלטל מן הבית. It's a thing that you need to bring from one area to the next area. ולא תחטא, and you should not sin, זה מעשר. This talks about, reminds you of tithing. כלומר, שלא לאכול דבר שאינו מאוסר, not to eat something that is not tithed, כמו שכתוב, ולא תישאו עליו חטא. Like it says, and you should not carry upon him a sin. Up to here. ספק חשיכה, ספק אינו חשיכה. What happens if it's a time where you're not sure, it's called בין השמשות. When it can, maybe Shabbos, maybe not Shabbos. כלומר, בין המשמשות. So what do you do that? You already found yourself in such an area. So now should you do that, all these things? Should you do Meiser? Should you do the Iruvei Trumim? And should you light the candle? In those lights, it's in between time. Okay. You're not sure.
But before he said at night, now he's
before
we
said סמוך לחשיכה.
סמוך.
No. אם חשיכה means before.
Oh, אם חשיכה.
Yeah, before.
Okay, thank you.
Over here it's doubt, whether it's Shabbos already or not Shabbos. You don't know.
So this is doubt. Before it's for sure.
For sure, okay.
Okay, now it's doubting. Okay.
אין מעשרים את הוודאי. So before חשיכה, you do not tithe the things you need to for sure tithe. את הפירות שבוודאי לא הופרש מהם מעשר. If the fruits for sure haven't been tithed, you're not allowed to tithe. כשם שגזרו חכמים שלא לעשר בשבת. Just like the sages said, you're not allowed to tithe on Shabbat. This is from the sages, you're not allowed to tithe from Shabbat, on Shabbat. לפי שזה כמתקן דבר. It's like you're fixing something. שלא היה מתוקן. In other words, before you couldn't eat it, and now you're making it be able to eat it. So that's not a Shabbos thing to do. Even though you didn't do any Isur from the Torah, we're not allowing you to do it. Because you're preparing something on Shabbat. You're preparing your food on Shabbat. כך גזרו שלא לעשות בין השמשות. So the sages also said, you're not allowed to tithe בין השמשות. In the area between Shabbat, by the way, in the area between Shabbat and Tfadon. ואין מטבילים את הכלים, and also you do not take to the mikveh vessels. Again, להעלותם מידי טומאתם. If they were impure, you're not allowed at that time to purify them. שזה כמתקן כלי, because you made it befitting to be eaten on. וחכמים גזרו על כך אף בין השמשות. And the sages made a גזרה, not only on Shabbat, also בין השמשות. Also in the area where it's ספק Shabbat or not. ואין מדליקין את הנרות. And of course you don't light the candles, because it might be Shabbat, you might be breaking Shabbat. כלומר, ואין צריך לומר, and for sure, שאסור להדליק את הנרות, you're not allowed to light the candles. שהרי זה ספק באיסור של תורה, because it's doubt in a prohibition of the Torah. ויש מפרשים שכוונת המשנה היא שאין אומרים לנוכרי להדליק. Some say it says, אין מדליקים את הנרות even by telling a non-Jew to do it. You're not allowed to do it. שאף זה משום שבות הוא. Even that you're allowed to. כשני הדברים הראשונים. Just like the other two. אבל מעשרין את הדמאי. But you know what you are allowed to tithe? You're allowed to tithe the dmai. Why? Because the dmai is safek. Okay. Maybe it was tithed.
Yes, maybe no.
Maybe it was tithed. And now it's not Shabbat. So again, it's a safek. And you don't make a gzera, a decree, on two doubts. You remember the old rule? They don't make decrees on two doubts.
The time is safek and the dmai is safek.
That's right. The time is safek and the dmai is safek. תבואה שנלקחה מעם הארץ. This is produce that you took from an ignoramus. שהואיל ורוב עמי הארץ מעשרים מהם, since the majority of the nation do give tithing, הקלו חכמים בדמאי לעשרה אפילו בין השמשות. The sage says there's two doubts over here, therefore when it's you're allowed to do it בין השמשות. ומערבין, and you're allowed to do עירובין. Of course the עירובין that we're talking about is not עירובי תחום. עירובי תחום between two cities, you'll be carrying, it might be carrying on Shabbat. And that's a no-no. We're talking about עירובי חצרות, when you share a yard. ומערבים דווקא עירובי חצרות, שכל ענייני עירובי חצרות אינו לחומרה בלבד. Because all of this is just a stringency. אבל עירובי תחומים אסור לערב בשעת בין השמשות. But עירובי תחומים, obviously, between the two cities, that you can walk between them, you're not allowed to do it when it's doubt on time. לפי שהם תיקון גמור, because then you're fixing it for sure from the Torah. והסמיכום חכמים על מקראות, הלקח החמירו בהם. And therefore they were stringent on it. ותומנים את החמים. And you also allowed to do one more thing. We're not going. We have a chont pot. It says on Shabbat you're not allowed to put your chont pot. Yeah, let's say you took it out of the fire. It's off the fire, and now you want to put it back, not on the fire. Oh. So you're allowed to put it on the counter. That's not a problem. But let's say you have a counter, you have a container, and it has feathers in it. The container is full of feathers. So you say, I'm going to put the chont pot back into this container with the feathers inside. And what's going to happen now, the feathers are going to increase the heat or keep the heat in it. Right? So on Shabbat, you're not going to be allowed to put the chont into something that retains the heat, that keeps the heat going.
Once you pull it out.
Once you put it out, that's right.
You can return.
You can't return.
To heat,
but בין השמשות, when it's in between the time, we're going to allow you to put it there. Because there's no fire there. It just increases the heat conventionally.
So actually, what if I didn't put the chamin yet? I just want now, בין הארבעים, I finish my chulent, I go out there, the tanur, and I'm in בין הארבעים, I want to לטמון אותו. That's what they mean.
בין הארבעים, לטמון אותו, you're allowed to. בין הארבעים, if it would have been 2 hours later on Shabbat itself, you're not going to allow, even though there's no heat there, you're not allowed to put it in a container that retains heat. וטומנים את החמים, and you're allowed to put the חמים, but you're only allowed to put it בדבר שאינו מוסיף הבל. It's something that is not going to increase the heat. For example, if it is coals, for example, that might increase the heat. שכן בשבת אסרו חכמים לטמון את החמים, because in Shabbat the חכמים said you're not allowed to put the חמים, גזרה שמה ימצא אדם קדרתו שנצטננה. This is a decree. Maybe a person is going to find that his food, he doesn't have food on Shabbat, וירתיחנה ונמצא מבשל בשבת, and he's going to heat it up on Shabbat. אבל בין השמשות אין לחשוש לכך. So why aren't you worried about בין השמשות? You might come to eat it. It says same thing, and you're not allowed to heat בין השמשות. It says שסתם קדרות בין השמשות רותחות הן. Because it says if you just took it off the fire and you're putting it over there, so obviously it's hot. We're not going to worry that you're going to put it back on the fire. הילקח טומנים את החמים בין השמשות אף על פי שהם טומנים בשבת. Therefore you're allowed to put it there בין השמשות in the suffix time, even though you don't do it on Shabbat. ברם, בדבר המוסיף הבל, אסור להטמין אפילו בערב שבת מבעוד יום. But something that increases the heat, like the feathers, or I don't know what kind of materials will like increase the heat, you're not allowed to, if it increases the heat inside. גזירה שמא יחטא בגחלים משתחשך. It is because if you're going to allow you putting it in feathers, you're going to think you're allowed to put it also on coals. You know, Erev Shabbat. And then we don't want you to do that, even though the coals are cold. Right? Even though the coals are cold completely. But inside of them there's heat. You ever touched a coal from the outside, it's cold? Yeah. So this is what it is.